Yes.
Okay, great. I cannot see you in any way, so I'm happy to have important questions as we go, but we also have ample time for questions at the end. So my goal today is to talk about the progress that we've made at Reach on Algorand and what we've been doing, and about how we can achieve our goal of making blockchain accessible together. Our goal at Reach, we define ourselves as being about making blockchain actually practically mainstream. And we use a lot of different words to refer to this. We talk about how we want blockchain to be usable by normal people, both normal people who are consumers and normal people who are developers. We want it to be a ubiquitous technology that's as pervasive as normal internet technology. We want it to be mainstream, so mainstream that you would not ask somebody if they were using blockchain in their startup. You would just assume that they were using it in the same way that you assume every company that you talk to has a website and uses email and uses computers in some way. We want it to be easy and sustainable. And when we say sustainable, we don't just mean from a energy consciousness perspective, but we also want it to be sustainable so that applications can actually exist without needing token incentives and other Ponzi-like schemes. We think that it's important to provide real value for customers that they pay for, and that will produce a sustainable business. And we think that this is similar to the goals of Algorand, which are about making blockchain practical and scalable and sustainable as well. And so we summarize all of these to say that we want to make blockchain to be a boring technology that people don't lead with when they talk about their company. We want them to lead with the core value that they're providing for their customers. We think that the way that we can make blockchain mainstream in this way is to have amazing technology, a lot of developers with amazing tools, and an ecosystem that puts them together. We think that Algorand is the best blockchain technology stack, period. And we think that we at Reach provide the best developer experience, and that together our developers can produce the applications that people actually want to use. And so this is the framing that I want to use for this conversation, because that is what our ultimate goal is. Now, I want to defend a little bit this idea that we're the best developer experience in blockchain. I assume that we don't need to defend that Algorand is the best blockchain technology. So let's just focus on this one a little bit. Now, some people, they think that we define ourselves as being competitors to something like PyTeal or something like Solidity, but we don't feel that way. We feel that when Reach and Algorand get together, it actually leads to mass adoption, and there's no conflict between those. And the key here is that the thing that Reach provides, which is that better developer experience. And we use this rubric to make our claim that we do this. So let me just explain this chart. So each column is an application built in a different way. So on the left is Maker, which was built using Solidity. Maker is an over-collateralized stablecoin. In the center is XBacked, which is a over-collateralized stablecoin. And on the right is a centralized application, or a CRAP is what we call them, which is an application built with a service contract that represents a representative Web 2 application. Now, Maker and XBacked are basically produced in the same product, but one is using Solidity and the one is using Reach. And then we imagine that the CRAP is being produced not literally a stable coin or something like that, but a representative project that you might employ a service company to provide for you. Now, what this table shows is the expenses of doing these different things. We talked to the Maker developers and we learned what their expenses were. We talked to the XBacked developers and we learned what their expenses were. And we have previously run services companies, and we are familiar with service contracts. And so that's where this rightmost column shows. So let's just zoom in on Maker. So Maker, they employed 4 developers and they paid them $300,000 a year. And they worked for 11 months to get the first version of Maker. They also paid over $500,000 in auditing, and they in fact had multiple flaws and paid out $100,000 in bug bounties after they launched. Altogether, it cost them about $1.5 million to launch Maker, the first version. They've spent much more than that since then, but that's sort of their initial costs. In contrast, XBacked, they used Reach, and they had 3 developers who they paid $90K, and they worked for about 6 months to get their initial version, and then they paid about $100,000 in auditing. So their auditing expenses were actually almost half of everything that they spent their money on, and they ended up only paying about $250,000. And so that means that their expenses were about 7 times less to build a overcloud or a stable coin using Reach as compared to a competitor. Now, this number of 7x savings, we think that this is really wonderful, but we are not satisfied with this. We think that where blockchain needs to get to is the rightmost column, where you could build a centralized application with just 2 developers. You would be paying $250K because it's a service contract, so there's going to be lots of overhead, but they could do it in basically a quarter. There's no expectation of auditing, both because the consumers don't expect auditing, but also because the tools and the platform are secure by default, so there's no need for that. So you would pay about $125K to do that, or about 2x savings over Reach. We consider our competitor to be Web 2, and so therefore this rightmost column is our competitor. That's our long-run competitor, of course, but today we consider our competitor to not be High Teal or Teal or anything like that, but Solidity. And we can make a credible case to companies who want to build on Web 3 that they can spend 7 times less money if they use Reach. That's what our goal is. Now, you can ask why, how do we actually get this? The way that we get this is by providing a smarter programming language that gives you a faster development cycle and ultimately safer application development. Now, I could spend, hours talking about exactly how we do all of these things, but I wanted to summarize them in a way that is the pitch that we make to businesses and companies that want to build on Web 3. These companies, they don't care about Reach, they don't care about Algorand, they don't care about what technology they use. They want to think about the blockchain that they choose in the same way they think about what database they're going to use or what cloud provider they're going to use. And so with Reach, we want to provide a solution for them that is internally complex, but externally simple. And so we provide syntax that is identical to JavaScript, completely identical to JavaScript, so that they can hire from the pool of 25 million web developers. That's what gives them the ability to hire people at a lower salary. We provide a higher level of abstraction for when they program, so that they can focus on the value that they're providing for their customers, rather than low-level details like what transaction type is the one that they need in this particular situation. We provide a one-click testing and deployment capability, so that they don't need to train these new web developers on the low-level details. They can focus them on the things that are important for their customers. And every time you compile with Reach, it is always formally verified. And even if you don't know anything about how to use formal verification, we include formal guarantees that are useful for your program in every compilation. And we have relationships with auditors that charge 60% of their normal rate, and they finish in half the time if you use Reach for your program. And so that's why your auditing cost can be so much cheaper, if, of course, you feel like you need to get an audit at all. Now, that's what we provide, what our goal is, and how we do it. And I want to turn a little bit to talk about what our contributions so far to the Algorand ecosystem have been. And there's a number of these, and so we'll talk about them each in turn. First, we've made quite a few contributions to the core technology of Algorand. We're the authors of the on-chain governance system that was developed by the foundation, although ultimately not launched, although there's a future version that will be launched. We've discovered 3 DOS attacks on Algorand and given them with solutions to the company. We're the authors of the wallet arcs and a new event arc. We've done pull requests for AVM opcodes. We've produced a faster DevNet. For example, this DevNet, I talked to AlgoFi, and then when they started using it, their testing infrastructure started going about 4 times faster. That's because we enabled the dev mode, and we have a fix for dev mode that makes it so that it actually is faster rather than being slower. And we also provide regular advice, insight, and detailed technical feedback on the things that the company is working on, and even the code that they're working on as well. These are core technology contributions, but we feel that most of our contributions have been in the form of developer acquisition, because ultimately one of the main things that we're doing is we're drastically lowering the cost of getting into blockchain, both for companies and for people. Now, when we think about developer acquisition, we think about the entire space of all blockchain. And so it's useful to step back and think about how big that is. So Andreessen Horowitz, they just came out with a report that says that there are only about 6,000 developers who are building on blockchain in an active way month to month. Now remember, all of blockchain has about a $1.8 trillion market cap. And this is a comparable size to Google. And Google has 26,000 developers. So that means that something that is providing similar values in the world purportedly has drastically lower number of developers. And so the numbers of developers that are actually really doing meaningful things on blockchain is extremely small. We spend a huge amount of time thinking and looking at this slide from the Andreessen Horowitz report. Let me explain what this slide shows you. On the x-axis, you have the number of days since the first commit of a project. So for instance, when it says 400, that means 400 days since Ethereum started. So if you look over here, 400 days since Ethereum started, no one was using it at all. 3,600 days since Bitcoin started, here's the number of people who are using it. Now, of course, there are many people who are using things, but let's look at the y-axis. This is the monthly active developers. These are the people who are contributing to that are using it to build dApps. This is not a measure of the number of people who work for Bitcoin or work for Cardano or something like that. It's a measure of the number of people who are building Web3 applications on it. Now, each one of these different lines is a different network. As you can see, Ethereum is the most successful. They really started being successful after 1,600 days, and that they have about 4,000 developers. In contrast, and then the next most active developer community is Solana, which has about 900 developers. This matches the priors of most people in the space, that basically all blockchain activity is happening in a meaningful way on Ethereum and Solana, and everybody else, nothing is happening on them. Most of these numbers down here are for projects that have, hundreds of millions of dollars and still can barely crack 400 developers. Now you may ask, Algorand's not on this list. We have no idea why Andreessen Horowitz didn't include it. They do have this little comment right here that says, some projects were omitted due to unclear, unavailable, or imprecise data. So we have no idea how many people are building on Algorand. Well, the reason that we spend a lot of time thinking about this is that it shows us just how small the blockchain world is. And if we were to try to out Ethereum, that means that the addressable market is these 4,000 people. And it is not interesting to build tools that are going after these 4,000 people. We want to build tools that are going after the 25 million people. And so the other reason that this is interesting is that we know how many monthly active developers we have because we have telemetry on the use of the compiler. And so this is our graph. So our graph is that in about half the time as anyone else, we were able to get 700 monthly active developers. And notice that, Solana got a similar number in twice the amount of time, with literally sitting on over $1 billion. And we have a lot less than $1 billion. But what we do have is a better product, and one that is actually appealing to normal Web 2 developers that they can actually use. Now, in practice, this number basically is also the Algorand number if you had access to that, because almost all of our developers are in fact targeting Algorand, because once they build and reach, they have the ability to choose whatever the best blockchain is. And when they do that, it will be obvious to them that they should choose Algorand. Now, we've done more concrete. There are concrete ways that we have achieved these goals, these results. So if we just look at bounty hacks that we've run with Algorand in 2022, we've tracked 850 new developers working on projects. Now notice that this 850 is bigger than that 700. That's because this 700 is the people who are working on projects month to month. It's not the total number of developers. If we look at the total number of developers, there's another report, the Electric Capital report, and it suggests that there's about 40,000 people total. So, and most networks have about 10x people who've tried it over people that are actively using it. That's the same for us. We have about 7,000 who have tried Reach and about 700 who are active developers. We've noted, part of our Bounty Act process is that people have to launch applications on testnet. And so we've seen over 75, and some mainnet applications are coming from those. And we know of 60 teams that are working on projects right now after doing our bounty hacks. We have a vibrant developer community that comes from these bounty hacks. So for example, our boot camps, the Ascent boot camp that we run and author has had about 105 people registered. We recently started a new version of our emoji bounty hack that is an African-based one. And we got over 350 people to register, but we had to cut off the registration at 300 because we couldn't afford to have more people. This is actually really good sign when there are so many people coming to buy your product that you have to worry about what your margins are. And then we have our Bear Builder challenges, which are weekly challenges that keep people engaged with our developer community. And we've got 200 submissions of those so far in the last few weeks. This is a new program that we've recently started to have shorter developer engagement. We've also produced a lot of evergreen developer content. So our discussions on GitHub has about one post every single day of detailed technical things, and there's a growing corpus of interesting questions that people are coming to and finding answers to their questions. We provide tutorials, and in the last 28 days, we've had over 700 long-term visits of people reading the whole thing. We have 5,500 Twitter followers, and we tend to grow 5% per month. We have over 1,100 subscriptions on our YouTube channel, and we have almost 300 videos and 40,000 views. Now, these views, by the way, are not people who are just interested in, the progress of their coin. Our content are long-form tutorials, interviews with developers, and clips that talk about what our vision for blockchain is. And so these are, high-touch, engaging content. They're not just, clickbait. Now, let's zoom in on some of these actual people and the actual projects that are being built on Reach and who these people are. So I want to talk first about graduates of our bootcamp. So this right here is David Cooley. He founded Fungible, which is an NFT trading platform. They got a $100,000 grant from the Algorand Foundation after deciding to learn about blockchain. He knew nothing about blockchain before taking our bootcamp, went through our 6-week bootcamp, and then wrote a proposal which was approved by the Algorand Foundation to build his NFT trading platform. We've got Erin Murphy. She is one of the co-founders of the Algo Gaming Guild, which they're trying to build tools and infrastructure for people building blockchain-based games using Algorand, and they use Reach. This is Ujin Ong. So he was a traditional software engineer with no blockchain knowledge or interest or experience, and he decided to take our bootcamp because he was curious and it was a good option for him. And he was recruited out of that from Trudentity. They're a startup that provides identity verification and onboarding for new users into blockchain. And he was hired as one of the founding engineers with the skills that he got just from their experience with Reach, and they're building on Reach. Here's Pete McCarthy, no relation to me. He took our bootcamp and that gave him the confidence that he could start his own Web3 company. They're building Grid Zero, which is a regenerative crowdfunding platform. And their goal is to help Web2 companies transition into Web3 using his platform. If we step back from individuals and we talk about companies, here are a variety of the companies that are building using Reach. So let me just point out a few of them. We have things like The Zone, which is a gaming platform. We have Flemish Giants. They're an NFT collection that opted to not use an existing platform and do their own launch directly using Reach contracts. We have Headline. So you may know that maybe a month and a half ago, there was a contest in the Algorand world to identify the most innovative developer tool, and Headline was chosen. And Headline, of course, implements everything in Reach. We have MetaPunks, which is a blockchain game that is also working on building some DeFi products as well. Over on the right, we have these companies in red, which are actually companies that have contracts with our premium version of Reach. One of the things that we do is we surround the open core of Reach with a premium contract monitoring and support platform. And so there are a few high-profile things here. There's XPact, which I mentioned before. There's Nettle, which are building a carbon net zero payment platform. There's Dequency, which provides music sync licensing. There's Vestbloom, which is an NFT marketplace that also has a unique way of doing NFT-based advertising, as well as some other ones. If we look at two of these, Humble and Alloy, these are actually companies that are part of our accelerator. Actually, let me step back 1 second. So these companies, they are actually producing real on-chain activity. So if we take a snapshot of Q2, there were about 5,500 applications that were launched using Reach. That amounts to about 12% of all the applications that were on mainnet in Q2. And there were about 37,000 transactions. So this says that these are applications that are being used. And if we were to focus only on April, in April, there were about 23% of all applications were built using Reach. And right now, in Q3, we are currently beating all of these numbers. And Q3 is not over yet. So as I said, there are a few projects that we know a lot about because we have our own incubator called Reach Labs. And so let me talk about Humble DeFi first. So Humble DeFi is a DeFi platform that defines itself as being DeFi for everyone. And what we mean by DeFi for everyone is that we want to provide a DeFi product that normal people can understand, normal people can and want to use. And so there are a few ways to talk about our success with Humble DeFi. So the swap launched on June 21st, and it's the first DeFi product of any kind that provides live customer support. So we have live customer support agents who, if you go to our site 24 hours a day, you can ask a question. And we tend to have about, I think it's something like 90-second response times for customers being satisfied. Just the other day, they were telling us about one of their experiences over the weekend, and a 14-year-old boy from Massachusetts called and asked for help getting his Algorand wallet set up and using Humble, and they walked him through that, and then he started actually putting some of his funds in one of our yield farming pools. If you look at the raw numbers, there's about $5 million of TVL, and there's about $250,000 of daily volume in swaps. And there are over 15 yield farming pools that are promoting activity in the Algorand DeFi world. That's one of our labs projects that has actually launched. But we also have another project that's called Alloy. They're a gaming platform. And when we say gaming platform, we don't mean a lame Web3 gaming platform or some sort of Ponzi scheme like Axio Infinity or something like that. We mean a gaming platform that is actually a plausible competitor to Steam, Epic, Good Old Games, etc. They have about $5 million in funding and are run by industry veterans from Blizzard. So, for example, the head of that project used to run BattleNet, which is the flagship gaming platform for Blizzard that has all of their Warcraft and Overwatch, etc. And they are scheduled for a Q1 2023 launch, and they have 18 AA core games. So what this means is that in gaming, there's this kind of scale about how big a game is. So AAA, they're the biggest games. That's like Call of Duty. These have $100 million budgets, and they have millions and millions of users all over the world. AA games is sort of the next level from that. These are games that are very impressive, and often there will be a breakaway hit from one of these, and then the sequel will be a AAA game. Success for a AA game is hundreds of thousands of users. And every single one of these 18 games are very high quality AA games that will be built integrated with Alloy, and their use will mean use of the Algorand network. If you go to the playalloy.com site, you can see videos and trailers for these games. These are not lame blockchain games that you have to like blockchain to be interested in playing. These are normal games where the blockchain experience makes it better for consumers and better for the developers. I'd be happy to talk about more about Alloy if you want, but it hasn't really launched yet, so I don't want to tout it too much, because we like to talk about what we've done, not just what we will do. Our summary is that we think that Algorand is the best blockchain in Web3, and that we are the best developer environment in Web3. And what I want from the foundation and from the company and from the Algorand world in general is for us to strengthen our partnership, acknowledge the success that we've had together so far and work together to have a concerted effort to bring Web3 to the mainstream together. We think that the past is instructive for this. So in the past, developers chose the winners in platform races. So Intel and Microsoft worked together to provide a superior developer experience for the PC, and that developer experience translated into a superior experience for companies, which were able to produce better products that made a compelling experience for consumers that ultimately created the success of the PC in the 80s and 90s. And we think that you and I are prepared and poised to do the same thing for blockchain, that Algorand and Reach can work together so that developers will choose the winners in blockchain, and Algorand and Reach will be the winning combination that brings Web3 to the mainstream. We think that the future of blockchain is in Reach and on Algorand. I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can sort of talk about a variety of things from here.
I had a question about the developer group. So you might know this, maybe not. Is there going to be in the future, do you feel, different developer groups based on different niches? So, for example, is there going to be, like all the developers now, you said there's 6,000, I think you said, monthly. How does that look in 20 years, regardless of Reach, regardless of Algorand? And then how does your strategy feed into how it's going to look in a year, 2 years from now? Does that make sense to the question?
I think so. So let me just reiterate back the question. So right now, there's this number, right, of 6,000 active developers in blockchain, and we sort of divide them into the blockchain that they use, and that's the way we think about those different communities. And how will this change in the future? In my opinion, I think that the web is representative of what we think the future will be like. Right now, there's 25 million web developers, but they do not think of themselves as being in a group of 25 million people that are communicating with one another. So we do not think that there will be a day when there is a 25 million user Discord community that is the Algorand Reach blockchain community. We think that people will talk to each other about the particular domain that they care about. So there will be people who want to engage with others about their particular industry, but there also will be more platforms that are built on top of Algorand and Reach. So an example is, if we have Node.js, if we have JavaScript and then Node.js, then you might have something like React, right? And so here's kind of a 3-layer application development stack where there's a base thing like Node, a base thing like the language JavaScript, then there's a platform like Node, and then there's specific frameworks like React. And there are communities that you can go in to learn about JavaScript, communities you can learn about Node, and communities you can learn about React. And there are, of course, frameworks that are built on top of React. Our general philosophy of the growth of blockchain is that it will be like the growth of all other platforms, and that there is not going to be a single person or company that defines what it means to be one of those developers. But we do think that there is a bit of a winner-takes-all perspective on some of the core technology pieces. So today, 95% of all web applications are built using JavaScript. And so we think that there will be a dominant programming platform for Web3 applications. We also think that there's a potential for there to be a dominant 95% blockchain. Blockchains are a little bit special in that the trade-offs about how you launch a blockchain can control what applications you want to launch there. So just to be super concrete, so there's this trade-off between decentralization, throughput, and finality. If we go into 3 things, those are all clearly in contrast with one another. And in my opinion, Algorand is in a particular space in those trade-offs, but I think that we could imagine a version of Algorand, not a version of the code, but a version of the way that we think about what Algorand is, that can fit in many different places in the spectrum and have an answer for all the different parts of the market. Kind of like how Intel has high performance chips, and it also has the Atom chips as well.
And excuse me if it's a stupid follow-up question, but what does that mean for Teal and PyTeal? Because that's one thing I haven't heard much. and I've spent a month trying to understand PyTeal, and I've got all these PyTeal things in my head, and I haven't been able to use any of them. So what does this mean for PyTeal and Teal?
So one of the things that I think that we need to do, Algorand and Reach, is come up with a good way to explain to new users how they should think about PyTeal and how they should think about Teal and how they should think about what they want to build. I have a particular opinion about what that should be, and forgive me if I'm a little bit bold in this. That I think that Teal should be presented in the same way that we talk about the consensus algorithm about Algorand. We do not expect normal blockchain developers who are building real Web3 applications to understand all the details of the consensus algorithm. Instead, we point to the consensus algorithm as part of the beautiful technology stack that makes Algorand so special. And I think that we should present Teal in a very similar way, that it is a low-level detail that if you are a hardcore programmer, you may be interested in learning about. But I don't think that new developers who come to Algorand should even know what Teal is in their first month of building on blockchain. They should only be thinking about that when they get to the point where they want to learn the low-level details. And the example that I use here is that most JavaScript programmers have never seen assembly code, wouldn't know what it looked like if they found it. And this is actually a good thing because it is the reason why the price of Web 2 development is so low, because the skill set that you need to be part of that space is so low as well. So I think that
complete sense. Makes complete sense. Like Wix and Canva and stuff makes complete sense. Cool with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Jay, I agree with you. I think that Teal, just like no one programs in the x86 instruction set, or very few do. Maybe if you're writing a hashing function or something like that, or you're handcrafting certain pieces of code or something. But so I agree with you there. I think Reach is a beautiful and very elegant technology, and I think it's great. I think as well, though, the challenge is with Reach, there's not a bijective mapping from the Reach world to necessarily the Teal world. So it is abstracted not just as a higher level language, with the way, for example, C++ might be to that x86 assembly, where you can say, if you inline a function, that the assembly then will be inlined. There's kind of quite a direct mapping there. Reach is you've got parts of it that are completely unmappable in isolation. And so my only concern there, despite the elegance and indeed, by the way, the programming model that you've designed in Reach, which I really identify with, the way you try to have unupgradable contracts and other things that I think are important. Despite those great things, I'm a little bit nervous just in terms of getting people on Reach and then potentially losing them to other chains, or indeed making it so that if they decide that they want to move away from Reach, that they have a harder time with that mapping exercise, getting their brains from Reach to somewhere else. Now, I'm only saying this just because I want everyone on the call to know that I think Reach is amazing. I think it's super cool, and I think it could be a big part of the future for us. At the same time, I'm conscious of these other two things, and I just want to be kind of open and transparent with that. So I'm not just saying one thing to you and then something else to everyone else, so everyone knows how I feel. So in general, really like it, but I'm a little bit concerned about these two things. But I've said that to you before, and I think we can find a way, hopefully, to mitigate my concerns there. But that's what I'm thinking.
Let me respond briefly to those points. So what John said is that Reach is not bijective with the underlying technology. So a bijection means that you can take something in one space and map it down, and you can take something in the other space and map it up. So for example, presumably English and French are bijective. You can have any sentence in English and in French. There's no things in French that are untranslatable. Now, actually, maybe this is a bad example because, Moliere is so beautiful, there's no way to really say it in English. But nevertheless, that's the idea about what bijection is. And so it is absolutely true that there are things that you can say in Teal which you cannot say in Reach. For example, in Teal, you can say something like, I allow my contract to be changed in the future to a new version of the program that takes all of the money and gives it to Chris. So Reach does not support the upgradable programs feature of Teal. And this is an example of something that we feel very strongly about, that it's a good thing to not have this feature. And so we're very upfront about not supporting that feature. There are other things that are a sign of a weakness of reach. So for example, with teal, you can do low-level optimizations that that have the potential to produce better code than than reach would. And so this is an example of something where you may say that there's a loss there. Now, at this level, if we're only thinking about it technologically, my argument against this is that in the real world, these things don't matter. And the reason that they don't matter is that real applications are built in JavaScript. They're not built in assembly. We would never consider building Google Meet using entirely assembly code. And the Web3 future that we imagine will happen is not going to be built by people doing assembly programming. Now that's the technological answer, but John also makes sort of a strategic and business answer or business problem, which is that if people are reach programmers, then do they feel that they are Algorand programmers? Do they feel that they have the ability to abandon Algorand and do something else? Do they feel that they want to, if they do want to abandon reach, it will be difficult for them to do something else? Now, these are true, and there are ways that we can alleviate them. For example, it is possible to align the incentives of reach and Algorand. Currently, Algorand owns about 20% of reach, and reach has many, many algos. So right now, our incentives are aligned to cooperate, but they could be aligned even further. And we could imagine having binding service agreements with one another about what our relationship actually is. At a more strategic level, in my opinion, I think that the ability to escape from Algorand using reach is something that is a short-term sales technique, but long-term actually is in the favor of Algorand. And so let me elaborate on this. When we go to a business-to-business call where we're trying to convince people to get into Web3, and when they get into Web3 to choose reach and Algorand, we are fighting an uphill battle because they have never heard of Algorand. Algorand is the 20th most popular blockchain that does not occur in the Andreessen Horowitz list of blockchains that anyone has ever heard of. Now, everyone here knows that Algorand is amazing and that the technology is great, but we have to face the reality that when we go and talk to Walmart and we're responding to a bid for giving them advice about how to deal with blockchain, they have literally never heard of Algorand. And so it's really important to be able to sell them something where they have the ability to escape if they want to, because they actually want to have the defensibility and they want to be able to diversify their risk of whatever their blockchain investment is. So in the short term, the ability for reach to be on Algorand and Ethereum makes it so that we can get in the door from a sales perspective. And then from that sales perspective, we can then turn it into a technology win so they can see how much better and more elegant it is to deploy on Algorand because it's drastically cheaper and drastically better. By providing the same interface, i.e. reach, to the underlying product, the blockchain, we now have the ability to show the value of that blockchain. This is the way that AMD is able to steal customers from Intel by providing a lower cost and sometimes superior product. And so that consumers are now agnostic between whether they choose Intel or AMD, and they can choose one that is the perfect thing that they want. So we think that that is the short run and medium term goal for Algorand. And of course, in the long run, new entrants to Web3 will predominantly choose reach, and they will predominantly choose Algorand through reach. And that'll be the mechanism by which Algorand and reach will drastically grow together. This last issue about whether or not, if you would like to leave reach, you're at a disadvantage, there is no denying that this is absolutely the case. If we were to go talk to the JavaScript developers that are working at TikTok or that are working at YouTube, and we said, all right, today we've decided that we're going to free ourselves from the horrible oppression that we're suffering under Node.js and JavaScript. We'd like to rewrite the application in assembly. Those developers would be out of a job because that strategic decision about the company to no longer use JavaScript means that they now are going to have to increase their costs by 100 times because they're going to have to get rid of all of their JavaScript developers and switch to assembly. So this is always going to be the case, that the more value we provide by lowering the floor and raising the ceiling about what's possible in blockchain will mean that we are creating sort of a intellectual and professional lock-in by having people be able to build their product in Reach and not be able to build their product in the underlying technology. And that's why we need to look at the other two things about the aligned incentives and about the sales pitch and the growth of the entire industry as motivating reasons to not be worried about this.
And then, but one other thing just to add on to what you said there, Jay, is that Reach outputs the actual base language. So if somebody did want to actually have that intellectual hurdle of learning a new thing, they could use the teal. They could use the solidity that Reach output and modify that directly. There's nothing stopping them from doing that.
Yeah, that may be true, Chris, but it's quite complex what gets put out, right? So it's not like if I were writing source from scratch. But what I will, one quick question I got is, do we have any clue right now how many apps on mainnet are built by Reach? And would it make sense? I actually think this would help us all to promote Reach, is to have a running dashboard that shows, hey, this just dropped on mainnet. Take a look. Heck, we could even do, I think you said 75, Jay, on testnet right now. Even showing those a dashboard for testnet Reach apps, I think will ultimately, we always looked at it this way, and we'll continue to look at it this way from our standpoint anyways, as far as the Inc.'s concerned, is market share, right? When developers make these decisions. They make the decisions on what tool they end up using, right? Or how they write it. And frankly, I know Teal quite well, but I can tell you this. I'm not a proponent of our future being only people that know Teal can write apps. That's a dumb idea, because frankly, it just isn't going to scale, and we're not going to get the 20 to 30 million web developers to ever come build a DApp on Algorand. So I've told Chris Swinner this, and I don't care if they write it in shoebox code, as long as we get dApps on the network. Now, what I would say though is we need to highlight somewhere, hey, these are the apps that are currently live on mainnet that are built with powered by Reach, right? And showcase that in a lot of ways, right? I think we do a terrible job on the Inc. side of how do we get stats and collect those and blow them up as far as what apps are out there, right? We try to track with DeFi Llama and all of that, but those are only a very, very small set of the applications. We do a lot of stats on our developer site, but we don't do these app-based and have a dashboard showcase, right? And I think this will help us with the Horowitz reports. And I will tell you this, I take a lot of those reports with a grain of salt, because those same folks invested in about half those blockchains that were on their chart, right? So always look at the source of when a company that's investing in someone actually does a report. That makes me a little nervous. That said, I think there's things that we can do to broadcast that out more. And I'm most interested in that 20 to 30 million web developers. I don't care about the 6,000 Ethereum developers. That your ability to go to Ethereum means very little to me. Your ability to produce great Algorand contracts, that matters to me the most. Just my 2 cents.
If I can also just provide a secondary POV on the point that Jay and John were discussing, which is looking at it from the perspective of the builder, right? I think, the question is, from an Algorand perspective, the strategic lock-in of getting somebody onto PyTeal and the inability to move off of Algorand, there's a strategic value there, right? That Reach somewhat mitigates. Now, thinking about it from the buyer perspective, and I think this is what Jay touched upon, which is to say that creates a high cost for the adoption, particularly on an institutional level. So if we were to go to Starbucks and say, hey, you should build your loyalty program on Algorand, what you have indicated to them by saying this is now there's a very high cost of building because of the proprietary language that they must learn and team that they must build in order just to onboard on. And so you've created unintentionally a moat or a high level of threshold entry point, and the cost is increased there. And so again, looking at it from the perspective of lock-in, yes, but where we really look at it is from the perspective of adoption and what it does in order to lower the barrier to adoption, particularly institutionally, wherein the value of being able to go to that same corporation and say, you already have a team in place that could build this application for you in the most immediate near term using Reach, a tool that we have a deep relationship with, and that enables that to happen very quickly. You've lowered that barrier to entry, not only on a developer individual level, but at the institutional level, which I think is where a lot of the greater kind of ambitions lie for both of our organizations. Because one or two of these large kind of traditional corporations transitioning into the space via our joint technologies represents kind of that move to mainstream in a much more efficient and effective way. And I think that's an important way to also, as I think about positioning our partnership, thinking about that complementary Intel-Wintel kind of style relationship.
Just a bit of context from the growth side of foundation. The mass adoption thing is fine. That makes complete sense to me. Why would we want to bottleneck for people coming in? That's cool. But that still doesn't necessarily answer what John said, which is people leaving. Now, because there's nothing to say that someone comes in, makes a bit of money, and they're out. What I would suggest is there is no real blockchain developers yet. There is no teal developers yet. They're unicorns. They exist somewhere, but you don't see them twice in the same day unless you go to an event. So what I would assume, mass adoption-wise, the biggest percentage of people who are going to be learning teal, and there is, some, good things about being able to use that, the escrows, the crowdfunding, etc. Excuse me, I just finished understanding Merkle tables, so I'm coming along. But in that sense, if we're looking for the next 10, the next 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 people coming onto teal, would they not be coming from Reach? So for me, what I would be looking for is potentially a 10% scholarship almost program where some of these guys, all of these 10,000 people that you're going to be bringing through, some of them are going to want to go and take this to the next level. And I would be looking for the plan to onboard them onto teal. That isn't all of them. I'm not saying teal first. I'm saying teal last. And if we can get some of the greatest minds onto it in that way, that would be, on my side, very beneficial. I mean, what's your thoughts on that side?
Yeah, so let me respond to this idea, Micah, and also a little bit of what Jason said. So Jason asked the question, could we have a dashboard that talks about how many mainnet applications there are? I mentioned earlier that in Q2, we were 12% of all applications, and that we are on track to beat that number drastically in Q3. So the next thing that Jason said is that, how do we promote things? Do we let developers choose? Do we just sort of throw up our hands and say, well, there's a whole bunch of options? The way that I've just framed what Jason said reveals my opinion about this. I think that our role model when it comes to getting developers onto our platform of Algorand and Reach is really Apple. When you go to Apple, it doesn't say, well, you could program in raw C, you could maybe use Objective-C. Well, it's possible to use C++. Maybe if you wanted, you could use Swift. They say the best way to build iOS applications is to use Swift. And here's the best way to do it. Here is the onboarding tools to do that. And they are proud and they put their first foot forward of what they think is the best way to do things. And I think that we, the foundation and the company, need to think about what that best thing is. And Micah brings up the interesting point that if we're worried about people leaving, the place that they're most likely to leave from if they have great success is to build a even more performant version of what they already have. And so he's suggesting that people may leave Reach and actually go towards teal so that they can develop at a lower level for whatever benefits they see from that perspective. I think it's a totally plausible story. I personally would rather us not worry so much about what small percentage will leave Algorand and Reach, but instead think about getting the next 1 million developers onto blockchain. And that
Sorry, I didn't mean it that way around. I mean, in my opinion, you guys are going to be one of the biggest drivers of bringing new developers to Algorand. So that would be where I would want to get the next 1,000 teal guys, because I don't want to find teal guys first. We can't just find teal guys growing in the garden. They're going to come from people who are coming through Reach, learning developers, and now they're like, I want to take this to the next level. That's not going to be everyone, but even if it's 1 in 100, if you're bringing 100,000 over the next 3 years, that's more teal developers than exist in this world right now, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. And I think that this idea that we want to onboard the next million developers, the reason that this is so important is that those developers will make the applications that people actually want to use. How many of you who work every day thinking about Algorand used an Algorand application last week that made your life better? Now, I'm going to say that you're not allowed to count rebalancing your holdings of your speculative tokens. I believe that very few of you did this, and that's because there are very few applications that anybody wants to use on these networks, and that is not an Algorand specific problem, it's a Web3 problem. And that Web3 problem will only be solved for many, 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 many people. Now, John, you raised your hands, and then Hugo raised your hand as well.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I know we're out of time. I just wanted to say I totally agree that teal is fit for the purpose it was meant for. Why do we have assemblers? Why do we have assembly languages in C? Why do we have x86 assembly, ARM assembly? The answer is because it helps with writing debuggers, it helps with writing compilers, it helps with human interpretation of the effectiveness of a compiler. No one writes in assembly, really, anymore for any regular app. And 99% of people will be writing regular apps on Ethereum and on Algorand and everything else. So teal, in my view, is not fit for purpose as a general purpose language to express yourself, to build your app on any platform, including Algorand. So I definitely agree we need to get to a place that we're using something else. I think Reach is definitely part of that story. But as I've mentioned before, I think also part of that story might be something similar that has maybe Python-like syntax that can take a Python application and then spit out teal as well. So I'm excited to kind of bring this forward to you guys. I just want to say that I'm aware that teal is not gonna get us where we need to be.
Thanks. I think we're at time, but Hugo, if you can make a quick comment or question.
I mean, just a short thing to say that we need a long discussion on okay. So first of all, I'm responsible for the university programs in the Algorand Foundation. You may be aware of this ACE program that we start actually on August 1st. We have many university teams, professors that will be working under this program. Many of them are interested in programming languages, and Reach is definitely an object that they are interested to study. We need to have some conversation about that aspect of Reach and how we connect to the university performers. But then the more important one is that we are trying to educate this generation of students on blockchain in general, but also in Algorand in particular. And I think that Reach has a very important role in this education. So that's another discussion that we need to have on how we make Reach grow in the university education part. So
thank you, Hugo. So to close, kind of the summary of what we've talked about. We've talked about what Algorand and Reach have done together so far, and we're at a time. But I want to plant the seed in your mind about what we can do next. We have our sort of concrete proposal of what we want to do. We want to have a unified business-to-business strategy where we go to traditional companies together. We want to have a unified developer acquisition strategy where every developer acquisition event and technique that the foundation and that Algorand is doing in general is something that Algorand and Reach work together on. And we want to take this idea that most developers will use Reach and most developers should use Reach and try to integrate that throughout all the ways that we talk about and preach about Algorand. And we think that we can provide lots of technical advice about what the strategic vision and goals from a technology perspective Algorand should provide as well, and that we should set our sights to always be better than Ethereum and always be competitive with traditional Web 2 development, because that is where the market is. The market is those 25 million, and we need to focus on getting those so that when they think about entering blockchain, they are not forced to decide between the 20th most popular blockchain and the thing that everyone else is using. We want them to be able to decide the best tool for them that will allow them to actually build the product that they want, that their customers want. So hopefully we can have this seed in our minds and we can think about what the next details of that are going to be, perhaps in a smaller call. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you all for being here. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
guys. Really helpful.
And
Thank
Jay,
you.
I will reach out to you for next steps. The conversation is ongoing. Thanks, dude.
Thank you, John.